Hello, Podcast Village. I'm Vanessa Eccles, your host of Colorblind, Race Across Generations, along with producer Keith.
Hello.
Well, this is a first for the
Yes.
podcast, and this was a riveting conversation. I remember saying I would never have any racists on the
That was our
skinheads or clan members, or
that was
anything
our
like
very
that.
first conversation.
Right, on the podcast. So today we have a former skinhead, went to prison for a hate crime, and now she is one of the leaders of a group called Life After Hate. And talk about someone who has made a massive transformation in her life.
Running the gamut.
Yeah, from everything.
Yes.
So we can't wait for you to hear this conversation. So just join us right now as we listen to Angela King. Angela King, thank you for joining us for Colorblind Race Across Generations. So you grew up in South Florida, went to Catholic school for a while. So how does someone like you end up being a member of the Skinheads?
Hi, thanks for having me. I did grow up in South Florida, and it was actually Baptist school that I attended, but I also attended Catholic services because my parents, my dad was Baptist, my mom was Catholic. So I think there are a few different things that led me into involvement with the violent far right. One of those things was that I was raised in a home where I was taught racism and homophobia. So my parents would use racial slurs, stereotypes were prominent, and not too hard to discern, listening to the kind of jokes my family would tell. So to be quite honest, I didn't think it was really abnormal because that's what I knew. And I had no reason to think differently. So going into middle school as an adolescent, I went through some really difficult stuff, some identity issues, on top of the normal teen angst. Really questioned who I was as a human being, questioned everything about myself. I was bullied mostly verbally, but around the age of 12 or so, the first time I was physically bullied. And when that happened, I fought the bully back and reasoned with my adolescent brain that if I was the one doing the bullying, that could never happen to me again. So I became violent, was acting out all over the place. And by the time I got into high school, I was a mess. I was promiscuous, doing drugs, drinking, really just having a very hard time navigating life. And I went around from group to group, different cliques in high school, looking for a place to belong and a place where, I felt like I was wanted. And I eventually found that place with a group of neo-Nazi skinheads.
And so what, at that point in your life, with everything you were going through, what was appealing to you about their message and their actions?
So the initial appeal when I met this group, believe it or not, even though I was raised in a racist, homophobic household, their beliefs, the ideology, that was not the initial draw for me. Initially, it was, I think, I was at this point of exhaustion because I literally was going from group to group. Thinking back to that, it's a kind of, trying to be what you think others want you to be so you're accepted. So I did this with a handful of groups. The last straw was I started hanging out with a gang and I was raped. And the anger and the pain that I felt, I didn't think it was possible, but it became exponentially worse. So meeting the neo-Nazi skinheads, I already knew them, but when I first met them, they were into punk rock. So coming back around to them again, their beliefs made them stand out. It made them seem like people respected them because, for instance, if they walked down the hall, other students would get out of the way. People looked at them a certain way. I mistook that for respect when it was really disgust, and maybe even anger or disdain. So initially with them, they accepted me and they didn't shun me because I was violent. They didn't, ask me why I was so angry all the time, why I did the things that I did. They just seemed to accept me, and beyond accept me, they actually genuinely seemed to care whether or not I was around. And the beliefs followed after that, which is something that we see in the research that's being done about people who become involved with violent extremism.
And you were involved in some violent acts when you were a member of the Skinheads. And tell me about the act that led to you going to prison.
I was involved in violent acts. I got into a lot of fights. I started a lot of fights. Ironically, most of the violence occurred with other white people, and not necessarily people of color or other marginalized groups. When I was 23, I went out one night, and this was after having been involved in the violent far right for about 8 years of my life. I went out one night with a group of associates, and we went to a bar. We got drunk. We got into a big fight, and then we drove around pumped up on alcohol and adrenaline, discussing, what should we do for our cause and what should we do for our beliefs and our movement. So we decided to find a place to rob, and the plan was to take, whatever money and to split that among ourselves, but to also send money to the organization we were involved with. So that's what I did. I took part in an armed robbery. I sat in a car discussing and planning what we were going to do. I never once made an attempt to stop it or, to encourage the people I was with to, do some maybe critical thinking about what we were doing. And for that, I found myself sitting in a federal prison at the age of 23.
And that turned out to be a pivotal moment in your life. Or what happened? What changed?
It did, absolutely. So going into prison, I had some pretty strong ideas about my situation in general and about being incarcerated. One of the biggest things I remember is feeling like I wasn't accountable. I told myself, I'm not, this isn't going to stick on me because I just sat in the car. I didn't go in and actually hold the gun or rob the store or anything. So that was a big hang up for me, was the failure to take responsibility. I also figured that because of who I was, because of why I was there, it was a highly publicized hate crime case. So I figured I would spend my whole time with my back against the wall fighting to protect myself. And it was different for me because I was suddenly alone. I didn't have my support system, my group of friends. And being incarcerated was the most diversity I'd ever been exposed to probably in my entire life. So I was expecting a lot of really bad stuff, and I was put into solitary confinement, which is called the Special Housing Unit in the federal system, for 3 or 4 weeks because they were unsure, if I was going to start problems, if people were going to, start problems with me. When there was no incident there, they decided to put me in the general population. So I went in hesitantly, tried to, cover up my more blatant racist tattoos and keep to myself. I used to be a smoker, and I smoked at that time, and smoking was still allowed there at that time. So I was in the rec area. I remember chain smoking Like that was my daily activity in the beginning, just being stressed out and not knowing, what was going on. So I was in this rec area, literally with my back against the wall, um, you know, sit, sitting on the floor, smoking, and there was this woman of color that kept looking at me. And I immediately took it as, something aggressive, and I was thinking, she's planning something. She's got friends and they're going to jump me or do something to me.
Mm-hmm.
She just kept looking at me. And finally, she just out of nowhere said, "Hey, do you know how to play cribbage?" And she said it in a really kind of cocky way. And I have always had a potty mouth. So I'm not going to repeat exactly what I said, but essentially it was,
Thank
"What
you.
is cribbage?" And that began a turning point in my entire life. That woman picked up the cribbage board, picked up the cards, came over, sat down next to me, and taught me how to play cribbage. That was 2 decades ago, and she and I are still friends today.
At any point, did you ask her why she reached out to you?
No. We So there was a small group of us women in the prison that were really close, and it was myself and a few other Jamaican women. And there was this bond that I know I will never do it justice trying to verbalize it, but the closest I can get is that being in there, it was a fight for survival. And I don't just mean like the basic needs we have as human beings to feed ourselves or, to sleep or to shower or things like that. I mean, mental and emotional survival, and being able to pull through an experience that is crushing. And, being in there with some of the women, they didn't let me off the hook. They held me accountable by asking me really difficult questions, things like, if I met them before prison, would I have tried to kill them? Would I have called them racial slurs? Would I have tried to hurt their children?
And the answer was?
Unfortunately, the answers that I had for them made me so ashamed to have to sit there and say, I probably would have tried to fight you or done something to you or called you names. But being in prison, one can't just get up and run away if they don't like the conversation. So, I don't know. It was just, it's very hard to explain, that bond. Over the years, I've communicated to them that, I literally credit them with changing the course of my entire life. But I've never asked, what made you decide that day to teach me how to play cribbage?
So you didn't gravitate toward any other neo-Nazis or skinheads or anyone like that when you were first locked up?
No, actually, so I did have an interesting experience that was definitely a learning lesson. I made the decision to cooperate with law enforcement after a while. And part of that was being transferred to a county jail to testify against another skinhead in a different hate crime case. And when I was there, I ran into another woman who I knew from my, time in the violent far right. But what was strange about it was she was Jewish and she was gay. And she sang in a death metal band. She was a heroin addict, and that was why she was in prison, I think for stealing something. And I fell right back into the same kind of pattern with her. She really disliked Black people, and it seemed very eerily easy for me to slip right back into the same type of conversations and making fun of people. But what was different for me was that I felt guilty because I knew that I was forging relationships and friendships with women of color. So it was quite a lesson for me, and a path to some soul searching and some critical thinking. But other than that, no, absolutely not. I did not gravitate towards anyone with the same ideas, other than that experience.
So you form a relationship with these women of color in prison. How long did your transformation take? I'm sure you didn't just wake up one day and like, hey, today I'm not racist anymore. Tell me about that journey.
Oh,
How long did it take for you to evolve?
absolutely. That is a great question. It was actually very difficult, and I, I don't think there's any easy, quick answer to that, but I'll try to sum it up as quickly as I can.
Mm-hmm.
So, from as early as I can remember, I had these hateful thoughts and beliefs drilled into me. First by my family, then by the individuals I associated with in the violent far right. So going to prison, realizing that, I was there because of my involvement, because of the choices that I made, the bad decisions, the way that I treated people poorly. I knew that I wanted all of that to be different. And I, was making these friends, making plans for a different life when I was released. When my time was almost up and I was pretty much on my way out the door, I was petrified. I was even more afraid leaving prison than I was going to prison. And the reason for that was because no matter how much I wanted to be different, there were some things that did not just cease to exist or stop happening just because I had a change of heart. So the best example I can think of is, for a very long time, I could see a person of color, maybe a man that I thought was gay, or, something similar, and I would automatically think a stereotype, think a racial or homophobic slur. And they were not thoughts that I meant, but they happened. And I literally came out of prison in May 2001. By August, I was attending community college. And my fellow students probably thought I was insane because I literally walked around talking to myself. When I, started taking sociology classes and psychology classes and, different things like that, it really motivated me to do everything I could to change that behavior. So I would talk to myself and literally ask myself, Angela, why did you think that? Did that person do something to you? Is this something that has merit? Is this just something that you've been taught? And it was just undoing this bad habit. I can tell you that after years of working on myself, those things started to change. But the brain is a tricky thing, and it plays tricks on us. Now, after talking about going through that for a couple days, I will probably experience thinking racial slurs, thinking homophobic slurs, thinking stereotypes, and I will go through the same process of talking my brain back and going through this with myself and saying, this isn't true, this isn't how you feel, this is your brain doing this, and you need to be conscious of it and do your best to stop it.
When you meet people now and they know or hear about your former life, do you find that there are still some people who are skeptical that maybe she's still a racist?
So in the last few decades of doing this work, I have only ever encountered a few individuals who think that, or who initially thought that before having a conversation. And one thing that I think has helped that, when I first came out of prison and started sharing my experiences, I had this overwhelming feeling that showing emotion made me seem weak. So when I would share my experiences, if I started getting emotional or tearing up, or I would hold that in like my life depended on it. And the result was someone not believing me and saying, I don't think you're being genuine. It seems like you're, hiding something. How are we supposed to believe that somebody could make this big change? And, there were several different things happening. One of which, it's not easy to talk so openly and so publicly about my worst mistakes and the worst things I've ever done in my life, the worst things that have ever happened to me, the guilt, the shame, the everything. But in this journey, I realized that the best way for me to translate my own experiences and to bring a message that doesn't automatically make people want to shut down, I have to allow myself to be vulnerable. And not just be vulnerable, but be vulnerable in a way that is above and beyond everyday vulnerability. And in embracing that vulnerability, I have found that willingness translates to people making connections with me, even if, they don't have all the same experiences. What if just, one or two things are similar to what, an individual has been through? I wouldn't be able to break through to that without the vulnerability. And I have heard from several individuals in, over the past several years that is a big part of my message, is that I allow that vulnerability to come through. And it is pretty clear that I'm not just making it up. I've stuck with this for quite a long time and hope that I continue to evolve, and that's something that people can see.
Are you still in touch with any of the people who were skinheads with you when you were?
I think there are two people that I'm in touch with that I knew from back then, and both of them, I wouldn't say we're exceedingly close. I'd say it's more on the acquaintance level now, but both of them have expressed that they have changed their lives and their, beliefs as well. And other than that, no, not really. I have encountered a few individuals, over the past several years. I've been threatened. Had one try to intimidate me in a, store one day. But other than that, no big connections, no major incidents.
So is there still fear? Because when you mentioned that was my next question. Is there still fear that you have turned against what they believe in and turned against them? And I mean fear on your part.
Yeah, I get that. So when I was first released from prison, I was afraid all the time, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid that someone was going to come after me. And there have been threats. There's always going to be trolling and people who are hateful. I have been lucky, I think, but there have been some other things that have happened simultaneously. So one of those things is that, believe it or not, my 8 years involved in the violent far right was one long run of fear. But then it was a different kind of fear. Then we told ourselves there's this conspiracy against white people and, all these people are out to get us. I carried fear around. It was interwoven into my life. And, coming out of prison, having that fear of repercussion, it could have buried me if I would have let it. And I literally had to talk myself out of it and say, you're not going to live like this. That doesn't completely erase all fear, but it did mean that I made a conscious decision not to let that guide my life any longer. There's another kind of fear, though, that I don't really know how to verbalize it, but there's this fear that not necessarily the specific individuals who I knew would do something to me,
Mm-hmm.
but that in general, with this growing unease and this rise of, white supremacist sentiment, that myself or one of my colleagues will be targeted or picked out because of the work that we do.
What's been your family's reaction to your transformation?
My family has changed quite a bit. Out of both of my parents, my mom was actually more racist and homophobic than my father. And it was with her that I learned and got a lot of the ideas that I did. So coming out of prison, being this completely changed person, it was bumpy for a little while. I also came out of the closet. So my parents not only had to deal with my new belief system, and belief in diversity and inclusiveness, but they also had to deal with me being an out woman. So
So you came out of prison with a lot for them to deal with.
I did. I did. I absolutely did. And, after a lot of really tough conversations, I'm really glad to say that my mom is not completely there, but I would say that she has changed almost as much as I have. She is my biggest supporter today and my number one fan. In all these years doing this work, with the stress, with the challenges, with the victories, she has always been there, just to listen, and to try to learn and to be supportive. My dad, he was never super vocal about, being racist or anything, but there were times when I would hear racial slurs come from him or hear, racial or homophobic jokes. And I think it's been a little more difficult, the journey with him, because it hasn't been explicit in conversation. We haven't had the kind of conversations I've had with my mom. In fact, about a year and a half, maybe it was 2 years ago, my father used a racial slur. We were having a phone call, and I had to tell him, I love you, you're my dad, but that's not acceptable. And if you want to have a relationship with me, that kind of language isn't acceptable. And it was difficult. It was having to practice what I preach. It wasn't easy. My relationship with my brother and sister is really good. Thankfully, neither one of them went down my path. So right now, I would say that things could definitely be worse when it comes to my family.
When you look back on your former life, what do you feel about your old self?
When I look back, I feel sorry for my old self. Um, you know, I've been asked if I could go back and tell my, 12-year-old self something, what would I tell her? And I think I would just tell her to love herself, that it's okay to be who she is, that she doesn't have to change. She doesn't have to do something else to please other people. I, will always feel guilt for what I did, for the ways that I hurt others mentally, emotionally, physically, the ways that I hurt myself. But I try to find positives in everything. And I know that I wouldn't be able to do the work I do today if I didn't have those experiences then.
So tell me about your work with Life After Hate.
Sure. Life After Hate is the only organization in the U.S. That has this unique team qualified by skill, experience, and education doing intervention and other work with the violent far right. So we do all kinds of stuff. When possible, we do interventions, and we get, referrals from loved ones, co-workers, law enforcement, civil and human rights organizations, people concerned. Um, we also offer support groups for individuals who have defected from the violent far right and who are going through the disengagement and de-radicalization processes. And essentially, we try to help individuals get back onto a positive path, or maybe to find a positive path for the first time in their lives. We do community outreach. We're involved in different academic research, and are developing trainings and just doing a whole slew of amazing things. But our main, mission is to inspire individuals to a place of compassion and forgiveness for everyone. Me personally, I am a co-founder of the organization and am currently our programs director. So I'm managing all of our new projects and programs and getting some new stuff off the ground.
So you mentioned intervention. What does that look like in terms of intervening for people who are racist?
Interventions, they're kind of limited for us right now. Number one, we wish we had the resources to travel around the country doing interventions on racists, but I'm afraid that we would need cloning machines and a lot of funding. So typically how an intervention goes is, let's say a parent contacts us and says, my 16-year-old son has gone down this rabbit hole on the internet and is now, walking around using racial slurs and other, language and, displaying some really ugly views. Typically what we would do is make contact with that person. Mm-hmm. And I know that this is going to sound like very basic and simple, but the way to really start that is by listening and figuring out what's driving that behavior. Because at the end of the day, hate is something that's cultivated. It's not natural. We're not born with it. We don't grow up as children and say, hey, I inherently hate everyone who looks different than me or worships differently. Usually there are underlying factors. Research that has been done recently is just starting to really take a deeper dive into that. But one of the themes that's coming up, and this is not, set in stone yet, it's not across the board, but it is showing itself as a theme, and that is that individuals who become involved in the violent far right, they don't do so because they woke up one day and just decided they're racist or homophobic or they hate people. There are underlying causes. It could be anything from as simple as someone wanting to be a part of something and to belong to a social group to a deeper issue, somebody looking for protection maybe from abuse, someone who was bullied or experienced some kind of trauma. And that is in no way a justification for the beliefs or the actions, but it is a theme that we're starting to see. So that's why, we take this approach of no judgment, just help, because we know what it was to be there, to have those beliefs, and to have individuals who spoke at you or argued with you or told you you were stupid or wrong without listening to whatever grievances, perceived or real, existed.
Do you find that much of your work now is in some way trying to make amends for your past? Is that part of what drives your passion in this area now?
Actually, I think that I have moved out of that, but that is actually what drove me for the past almost 2 decades, was the shame and the feeling of having to make up for what I did and to repair anything, possible. And that really was a big motivating factor for me. Doing all the speaking all these years and the outreach, and it has only been recently that I have really been able to say that I think that I've made amends, and I'm no longer driven by that. I'm driven because I want to do this work, and I do feel a responsibility with the knowledge that I have, but I don't do it anymore because I feel like I'm making up for something.
When you look at the state of race relations in the U.S. now, are you discouraged? Are you hopeful? Are you frustrated? What are you?
All of the above.
I was going to say, or all of the above.
I think in some ways I'm simultaneously hopeful and discouraged. For my master's degree, I focused on inequality in our social systems. I am quite aware that racism and oppression were built into the fabric of our social systems. White supremacy is a real thing in this country that is separate from the violent racists that we see. And I think what makes this, for me, a simultaneous hopeful slash, I just don't even know, concerns, is because even though I knew racism is a thing, that it absolutely exists, it amazes me that so many people have been so emboldened by our current administration that it's just nothing for people to be out spewing racial slurs and to be hateful and to attack people because of their race or how they look, and mostly with misinformation. Hopeful though, because we can't do anything about it if we can't identify it and name it. And I think with so many people outing themselves as racist, that's a much needed first step. Like, we need to know where the problem is before we can fix it. But at the same time, it is really troubling to see so much happening right now in our society that is just so off, and just so many people falling into this trap and just sucking up the misinformation like it's water.
What happened to your tattoos?
I actually still have some of my tattoos. So quite a long time ago, I was doing a presentation in South Florida, and a woman offered the husband services, and he was a dermatologist, I believe. So she just completely on the spot offered up his services for tattoo removal. But it was quite a long time ago when the laser was first being used, so it wasn't really effective. But he was great. I mean, he offered to let me come in as often as I could handle the pain, and would laser me whenever I would come in. So it wasn't very successful. So over the years, I have managed to cover up almost all of my leftover tattoos from those days with other tattoos.
Okay. So as we close, I want to ask you the question that I ask the guest with each podcast, and that is a fill-in-the-blank question. And it says this: when it comes to race, I admit, and you fill in the blank. So, Angela King, when it comes to race, you admit?
I still have a lot to learn.
And you're trying to do that daily?
Yes.
Angela King, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So that was our discussion with Angela King. I think I ran out of like fascinating, riveting, amazing. That is a compelling life story that she has.
I was fascinated when she said that the most diversity she ever had in her life was in prison.
Yeah, when she went to prison. So that was just wow. So thank you all for listening. Don't forget you can reach out to us on Facebook and Twitter. We would love to hear your comments on this segment. And so thank you for listening to another episode of Colorblind Race Across Generations. Remember, you can find us everywhere. Let's see, Apple, Stitcher, Google Play, and on our beautiful website, colorblindpodcast.com. I'm Vanessa Eccles along with producer Keith. See ya.
Goodbye.